have felt the need to get some information out there. We've had several of you who have sent some questions in already. And so we're going to be sharing some of those questions, but we also encourage you, if you've got questions that you want to ask live, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen if you're watching on a computer or an iPad or tablet. If you're watching on your phone, the Q&A tab's probably across the top of your page, but click on that page, type in your question. We will see those questions and get to those as well. We're going to be with you for about an hour today, and we want to share as much information as we possibly can. So I'm going to cut this introduction short and get right into these questions. So Dr. Mensah, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing with us this information.
As always, Mr. Wells, thank you very much for facilitating the process. And, it's just such an important topic these days, and there's so much confusion. And what I want people to understand is that a lot of our information is really going to be directed more specifically to our own patients or people who are, in this world of what I don't want to say is alternative medicine, but comprehensive medicine. You've done lab analyses and you have an understanding of your body and your brain that is not yet readily available to most of the world. In a very unique place, you to be congratulated, but at the same time, that means that we can look at a lot of considerations from a very different perspective, much more comprehensively. So I think that's where we begin, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in and sending in questions. I think it's great.
Very good. Very good. Well,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that's a perfect segue for our first question. Because our first question came to us with the caveat, with the explanation that this particular person is a longtime patient of Mensah Medical, who is in their late 50s and who is asking if he or she should be taking the virus right now, or I'm sorry, taking the vaccine right now, given the fact that they've never taken a flu shot before, given the fact that they've, very rarely been sick, never had a cold or the flu. They're on a nutrient therapy program. What is your recommendation regarding the vaccine, especially for someone in their late 50s, early 60s?
Okay, so let's understand certainly what the CDC says and what many world organizations say. And then what I'm going to share with you is my perspective, okay? And you can find those recommendations. They're all over the place, so I really won't get into them. Common sense says that this is something that needs attention and it needs to happen on a global level, okay? But now let's look at who we are, because individually, our makeup, our exposures, our situations are all unique. And that's what may set us apart in terms of certain recommendations. So I don't have blanket recommendations for everyone because we do things a little bit differently. Most of our folks out there have been taking their nutrient programs. They've rarely gotten sick like this person in terms of colds and flus and viruses. If anything happens, it's fairly short-lived. We've had individuals who have had COVID, and the vast majority of them experienced, for the most part, fatigue for about 3 or 4 days, and then they were fine. And, let's just call a spade a spade. They were on programs that solidified their body's capacity to produce a wonderful fight against these kinds of situations. And they were all age varieties as well. Individuals over 50 and 60, individuals younger than 20, individuals in their 40s and 30s. So you're already doing the right thing if you're one of our patients, or if you're in the alternative world where you are taking lots of nutrients. So not just Mensah Medical, but a lot of practitioners also do this. Dosage is important. Now, having said that, the next thing I want to preface is that when it comes to vaccines, I think most folks out there realize or know that I'm not a physician who says that just because a recommendation comes down, it means it must be so for everybody, okay? When I say when it comes down, I mean from our general boards and so forth who say that, well, this vaccine should be done at 2 months and this vaccine should be done at this period of time. Some of those vaccines from our perspective really aren't necessary. Some of those vaccinations are absolutely mandatory and should be had. So I want to make it very clear. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I'm not a mandatory vaxxer either. I look at the individual person and we make determinations as to whether or not this is something you should do or not, okay? So I'm not going to get into any of the other vaccines right now, but we will get into this one. So for someone who sits as somebody who's had lots of immunization, lots of immune support through nutrient therapy, first of all, you're in a much better place than other people are. You're not going to be in the same category as many folks are who, have horrible diets, who have horrible conditions, who've not done anything to support themselves. It doesn't mean you're invulnerable either, okay? What it does mean is that you look a little bit more carefully at how your system works and operates. So let's get right to it. This person who's asking the question has had a pretty clean history. They seem to have a very strong immune system. And the question is, do we really need to get this vaccine? I'm not going to tell you you don't need it, but I'm going to say you're in a much better place to fight it if you were to get COVID. Most people in this age category who get COVID, who are without comorbidities, who are doing well from an immune support perspective, they tend to do okay. They may get sick, they usually get over it, and they probably won't have a great number of sequelae. But the question is not so much always what we do know, the question is sometimes what we don't know about what may be lurking. Is there an autoimmune disorder that runs in the family that this person may not be aware of? Is there a thyroid condition that they may not be aware of? Those kinds of things can make it a little bit more problematic and can make you a little bit more susceptible. What I'm going to share right now is what I shared with our clinical staff earlier today. The severity of this virus, because it is of unpredictable nature, means that we really should consider more so vaccinations than not for the broader population. Our issue is not always about vaccines versus no vaccines. The question is which types of vaccines. So I really want to get into this because I'm not a fan of what we call mRNA vaccines, okay? What I'm a fan of, in quotes, what I'm more amenable to are traditional vaccines. Now, what's the difference? I'm sure some of you are asking this question. So a traditional vaccine basically contains particles or pieces of the actual virus itself. So when you get an injection, what happens is that, boom, now you got a piece of that virus or pieces of that virus that get into your system. Your immune system is busy scoping out the area and it says, wow, there's something foreign that we don't recognize. This is important. There's something foreign that we don't recognize. So we're going to mount a response. We're going to bring out our army of white blood cells and T cells and so forth, and we're going to attack that thing. And while we're attacking it, we're going to send information over to our other cells so that they can develop memory, so that in case that invader comes back, we'll be able to attack it very quickly. That's what a vaccine does. It allows an individual to have exposure at a low level so that the immune system can build up a response to it and then take it out, but remember and build up memory so that the next time that invader shows up, it's going to be handled pretty strongly, pretty decently. That's a regular vaccine. Now, an mRNA vaccine really shouldn't be called a vaccine to begin with, but they want to make life easier for other people. So what this is it's a control mechanism by which they create an actual message for what's called messenger RNA. So you've got your DNA, which is like the ultimate blueprint that everyone has in every single cell. Now, it's like the king. The king doesn't do everything himself. The king tells people what he or she wishes, king or queen, by way of a messenger. It says, Jonathan, go and tell the people that it is my edict that we do blah, 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 blah. Okay? So DNA, like the king, talks to a messenger in order to deliver a message. That messenger is called mRNA or messenger RNA. That messenger RNA leads to the production of proteins. It delivers the message that the DNA wants the world to know. So we go from DNA to messenger RNA to protein production. Okay, we're going to leave it that kind of simple for now. Now, when you have natural mRNA, it's very short-lived. It doesn't last a whole long time. It just gets the message out and then it pretty much gets destroyed. Okay, no big issue. With the current vaccines that we have, the mRNA vaccine, these are different. They are much hardier messenger RNA pieces. They stay in the system much longer. What they do is that they direct your system to produce, for the most part, what is called the spike protein, or an analogy to the spike protein. So it looks like what it is that is present on the coronavirus COVID-19 itself. So then when your body produces that, then your system says, oh, look, a strange protein that we don't recognize. Let's go attack anything that looks like it, and let's build up memory from it. Now, I know I'm saying a lot, so I'm going to try to go back over this again. The difference between the two is that when you have a regular vaccine or a true vaccine, you're injecting particles directly into your system. When you have the messenger RNA phenomenon or the mRNA vaccines, what you're doing is actually telling your body to produce the protein that then is supposed to be recognized by your body as foreign. Okay? There's some words I don't really want to use to describe what is actually happening there. Let's just call it that is designed treatment. It's not a real vaccine. When you tell your genes to do certain things and you direct them to do certain things in this version, it's not a vaccine. Okay, that's manipulation. That's manipulation of the genome. I'm not a fan. Not a fan of that. Not at all. Okay, so the real idea, though, is we've had a very serious situation, folks. We've had a condition, a virus that doesn't behave like a normal virus running rampant across the world. Everybody's thinking, how can we deal with this by hook or by crook? So no one is going to fault anyone to come up with whatever mechanism by means, whatever means they can come up with in order to help save lives. Okay, that is what we're talking about here. But now that we've got a choice, we've got a veritable potpourri at some point in time of different ways to deal with that situation. What I'm sharing with you is simply my perspective on which version of these things you should entertain. Okay? Knowing full well that, first of all, I'm not an anti-vaxxer and I'm not a mandatory vaxxer. I'm a, who are you as a person, your situation, your conditions, and is that going to be necessary for you? Okay? So talking to this person in my long-winded way, I just want to say what I think would be important is for you to consider one of the traditional vaccines that should be coming out either at the end of this month or in the next 30 days that are true vaccines that don't have much to do with the mRNA situation. Now, I do want to address something else. Now, that was, folks, that was for our patient that we know what they're taking, we know how things are going, because I know how, in general, these things work. But I want to talk to you about other people. If you are on the front lines of this thing, if you are a policeman, if you are a fireman, if you are a healthcare worker, if you're a doctor, a nurse, whatever, by any means, you get whatever vaccine is out there now. Because from a cost-benefit analysis, we want to protect everyone, and they don't have time to wait for a few more vaccines. These people could catch this disorder and die. Many have, okay? From that perspective, whether it's an mRNA vaccine or whatever else have you, the cost is not as dangerous as the side effect here. I hope I'm saying that the right way. The cost can be much more deadly by not taking that vaccine for these individuals than it is for not taking it, okay? So if you fit those categories, by all means, get any vaccine you can right now, because if you get exposed, given that most of these folks are not 10 years old or 15 years old or 20, you're much more susceptible So protect yourselves. That's, by the way, that also goes for our seniors in nursing homes, okay? I know we've heard a lot about nursing home deaths and things like that and so forth, but the odds are still that a person will do better. They're in a higher risk category. So for those high risk categories, absolutely, go get the vaccine, whatever it is. Mr. Wells, I'm going to stop talking. I know there's stuff you wanted to add in there.
I was just admiring your thespian skills when you were talking about the king and the messengers. But that said, there have been some questions about how quickly the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, the mRNA vaccines that you've just described, how quickly they came to market, or not even to market because they're not being sold, but they're being provided. So how quickly we got them. So you know, should we be concerned with how quickly these vaccines are being developed? And is there a trade-off between how quickly something's developed and how safe it is?
There can be, okay? First of all, I'm always concerned about how quickly anything comes to market. And I'm not going to even get to our pharmaceutical industry right now. I want to maintain my livelihood here in my life. But the idea here is that we are in a critical time in our existence. This is not a situation where we can casually wait 5, 6, 7, 10 years to see if a vaccine is truly worthy, to see if something works well or not. We've got lives that are being destroyed, okay? So when we're talking about high risk situations, there really is no question, whatever it is that is going to allow us to survive first and then thrive in that interim space, we really have to consider that. And so, yes, it may not be the perfect world. And anyone who knows me knows I'm very much looking at, all right, now, what are all the parameters here and how perfect can we get this before we unleash this on folks? But if there aren't people around, there's nothing to unleash anything on. Okay? So we really have to take a look at this cost benefit analysis. Yes, I'm concerned the fact that we had an accelerated vaccine production situation, development situation. I'm confident in the sense that we know the majority of people, these vaccines will help. The majority of people, these vaccines should not have significant consequence. Does that mean that they don't have any consequence? Absolutely not. Water has consequence. Don't let anyone tell you there's no consequence to anything. There's always a consequence. But the issue is, are we going to do better by risking that consequence? Or are we going to really put ourselves in jeopardy by not taking that which is available for us at this point? Okay. Most people, again, will do well. Most people will be okay. But there are side effect issues that are at hand. We now know that individuals who have autoimmune disorders should be very cautious about taking these vaccines, period. Because what they do is they ramp up immune expression in the person in order to fight off an invader, which means that any kind of immune reaction to anything that is an autoimmune disorder, meaning your immune system looks at you as the enemy, that's going to be very difficult. That can be life-threatening in some people. So if you've got an autoimmune disorder, you contact your primary doctor and make sure they are aware before you consider taking the vaccine. And really look at a cost-benefit analysis between the two. That now includes thyroid issues. If you've had an anaphylactic reaction, okay, if you had a whole body rash because you took a vaccine somewhere or something along those lines, now you classify as somebody who's got to rethink, do I get a vaccine? Which vaccine do I get? When do I get it? Do I get a booster? All these things come into play. Many of us may not think about rashes as being an expression that there could be a problem. That's why I bring it up, because we've seen that in an actual case. Somebody had a whole body reaction. They were told no vaccine for you. Okay, risk is too great. So yes, in my usual verbosity, there is a good concern for vaccines that come out or any product really that comes out too quickly. We're going to see challenges. Look, folks, I'm not going to lie to you. We're going to see challenges. It happens because we're talking about a planet of what, 8 billion people. Out of those 8 billion, somebody is going to be reactive to something. And some people have already died. Most people have been just fine. And that some people have really been a fairly small number, relatively speaking. There are a lot of people who've had ongoing issues with regard to sequelae from COVID, who are miserable for several months. A few have been miserable up to 8, 9, 10 months now. Okay, they survived, but they were miserable. Is that misery that takes you away from home, job, viability, is it worth ignoring a vaccine for that? I don't think so. So we have to consider that these vaccines are more so here to help than anything else. If this were something simple like, oh, okay, maybe hepatitis A or something that's not going to kill you, then we might have a little bit more consternation about this. But overall, most of us really have to consider the viability of these vaccines versus their non-viability. Okay. In the big picture, sure, they came out fairly quickly, but I can tell you, these were not wicked people who developed this. These were concerned scientists who worked hard to try to find something to save not only their people, but people all over the world. With regard to COVID, we're all one people. I have news for you at this point in time. We're all affected by it. We're all in this together. So we have to look at this as a volume of the planet Earth in terms of people and what happens if we're not here? What happens if we are here? Many of us have already lost loved ones. We don't need to lose any more. We can help it.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in, and I want to remind folks that if you do have questions, use the Q&A tab at the bottom or the top of your screen. Type your question in, and we will make sure that we get to it. Before we do so, though, Dr. Mensah, because I know we're in the lunch hour and people may have some crazy schedules and may not be able to stay with us the whole time. I know you had something that you wanted to share. This might be a good time now that we're halfway through, a good kind of stopping point to talk about the special offer that you were discussing earlier today.
Let's talk. Well, okay, so I had a philosophical moment this morning, and I was on my way to work, and for whatever reason, it just came to me that there are really a lot of people who need help, and not everybody can afford it. So I said, okay, why not? Anybody who gives our clinic a call, leaves a message by, what do we say, midnight tomorrow night, will be seen at no charge at Mensah Medical. Telehealth, telephone, whatever it is. You've got challenges, you have issues with regard to typically mental health disorders, okay? We're willing to see you at no cost. One of the difficulties that we have, and especially during the time of COVID, is unemployment, reduced revenue for people. Illness doesn't take a leave of absence. Illness doesn't take a break. It torments people. And I think it was really, I'll just put it this way, divine inspiration or revelation that we're going to do our best to help people. And so we're putting it out there. If you or a friend have a challenge, whether it's bipolar disorder, ADHD, autism, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, OCD type behaviors, alcoholism, Mensah Medical is going to do its best to help you. We cannot take care of your nutrients, and we cannot take care of your laboratory fees. But if it is the idea that you can't afford to be seen, well, guess what? That's not an excuse for the next 24 hours. If you leave a message on our telephone system or whatever media we're using these days, a DJ, you can tell them better, that you need help or you want help, we're going to help you. And that first discussion, that first fee that usually covers 6 months of treatment therapy, We're doing it at no charge. That is our contribution at this particular time. And I think it really needs to happen. So there's no more excuse for those of you out there. I didn't tell you this, Mr. Wells, but I remember somebody shared with me, they were on Facebook and saw a conversation being had, and somebody said, you know, I was just at Mensah Medical, blah, blah, blah. And another person commented, well, gee, aren't you lucky that you could afford to be seen at Mensah Medical? And that touched my heart. It wasn't that it touched my heart, it actually made me very sad. Because we try to price our work such that a broad spectrum of people can kind of get to us. But it was a reminder that for many people, even that is still a challenge. So I decided that it's going to wrap that. Anyone coming to us for the next 48 hours is you're not being aware. So we're making it aware. Okay. All right. So there we go.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Dr. Mensah. And certainly we encourage folks to call Mensah Medical if you have any questions about this. You know, the number here is 630-256-8308. And even if you don't get through right away, leave a message and we'll make sure that you are part of this special program, this special offer that Dr. Mensah has put out there. Lots more questions coming in the time that you were just explaining that, Dr. Mensah. One that I think is really important because it gets at not only the vaccine question, but also just the disease itself. Someone is asking if you believe that those people who might be at a risk for the types of reactions that you described as it relates to getting the vaccine and maybe having an allergic reaction, are those same people probably at a higher risk of having a bad reaction if they were to catch the virus itself?
That's an awesome question. And it's very hard to tell. And the reason why it's hard to tell, I've got to tell you about this virus, okay? This virus is not a normal natural virus. It is not normal. It doesn't behave normally. It is a very different creature that behaves differently than any other virus. So its predictability now becomes a little bit more difficult. I think that if you have greater susceptibility or have to vaccines or any side effects and so forth, yes, there's a chance that you may actually react more poorly to the actual virus itself, if that was the question, Mr. Wells.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there should be greater concern with regard to that, absolutely, and greater consideration. But it may mean you really need to get vaccinated.
Right.
The question will be which vaccine and how much time can you afford to wait? Okay, as I said, we're looking at another month, maybe another month and a half before it really starts to open up with a greater variety of choices of vaccines. So.
And speaking thereof, someone was asking, what are those alternative vaccines, and do we know which ones are in the final phases of clinical trials or awaiting approval? You know, how will we know which ones and when they're coming out?
Okay, first of all, generally I like to try to stay away from naming products and so forth, but AstraZeneca is coming out with a vaccine. Johnson & Johnson is coming out with a vaccine. There's a vaccine called the Novavax vaccine. They're all coming out in the next few months. Okay, I believe AstraZeneca is probably going to be done in February. Okay, relative to this, so it's not that we're not going to have choices or options. We're going to have plenty. Okay, but there still is that vetting process. There's still going to be challenges that people will experience. And I'm not saying it's going to be a wonderful world and you know the birds going to be singing blah 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 blah. Look, right now the key is we want you to be alive. We want you to be healthy. We want you to be around for your family members. And that's why we're talking about this. This is not a time where we sit back and say, well, you know, I'm philosophically against vaccines or I'm a hardcore vaccine person. The question is, who the heck are you and how do we keep you alive? Okay.
And
Almost.
and when you say who the heck are you, you're talking who the heck are you physically and biochemically.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely. That's exactly what we talk about. Whenever I say who are you, we usually mean who are you biochemically. At this point, we mean physiologically as well. Your susceptibilities, your inflammation history, your thyroid condition, all those things taken into place. Okay. That's what we're referencing.
Very good.
Mr. Wells, I think somebody wants you to put that number up there again. So maybe you want to...
I've actually just typed it into the chat function. So anyone who is watching this webinar through the Zoom webinar portal, that phone number is available in the chat function. But once again, for those of you listening in, the phone number is 630-256-8308. Dr. Mensah, what about folks who've already caught the COVID-19 virus? And I've got a couple of questions related to that. One is, should those people get vaccinated even if they've had the virus? And then secondly, what are your thoughts on some of the treatments that we've seen as it relates to treating COVID when people get the virus? Like, I know there was a big thing several months ago about hydroxychloroquine and
two different questions.
Right.
Let's bring that question in after this first question because I don't want to forget.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, I probably already forgot the first question. If you've had COVID already, do you need to get the vaccine? First of all, if you had COVID already, the odds of you needing to get the vaccine imminently should be very low. Okay, you had natural exposure. Your body has developed antibodies, or it should be developing antibodies to the COVID creature. But I want to share with you a case. So we just had somebody quite literally yesterday talking about the fact that they got COVID, their antibody levels were at a certain point. They rechecked their antibody levels, and the antibody levels had actually gone down. Now, for that person, I would say you likely need to have a vaccine. It will act as a functional booster. Okay, but for the most part, if you've had any disease or disorder, you really should not need a vaccine after that. So those who've gone out and experienced COVID, so forth and so forth, for the most part, you should be okay. But here are the qualifiers that are difficult. What about those cases where individuals had COVID and then within a few months later got COVID again? They're not as frequent as most people would want to talk about, but there have been cases that have been reported. One 19-year-old gentleman had COVID, did fine, recovered. 2 weeks later, he got COVID again, and he passed away. Very, very sad. My feeling on the subject is that this person did not get COVID a second time. This creature acts really, really weird. I think that what happened is that this creature, COVID, was lying dormant somewhere and resurfaced. Most of the time, it's about reactivation. It's not about a second COVID exposure. So then we have to ask ourselves a question: how powerful is immunity developing against this COVID creature, as I call it, in the first place? And we don't have all those answers yet. All we can do is to do our best. So for the most part, if you've had COVID already, I don't think you need to go out and rush out and get a vaccine. Okay, I honestly don't. If you're somebody who's got susceptible conditions and you've had COVID, other comorbidities, then maybe you should be getting a vaccine. Talk to your primary doctor about that. But for the average person in the broad spectrum here, 85% of folks who don't have anything else going on, the odds are if you've had COVID, you don't need to run out and get a vaccine in particular at that point. Okay.
And the second question was, what about the treatments for COVID that we've seen in the news over the past several months? Hydroxychloroquine, plasma therapy, ivermectin, I think I said that correctly, those types of things.
I've been talking to a lot of our colleagues globally, okay? And some of my colleagues, highly respected, the best in the business here in the United States, have talked about things quite diametrically opposed to what it is I think. So some of them have been in favor of use of certain medications that I don't think are appropriate. And I say, well, listen, doc, if it's working for your patient population, then so be it. I don't see that connection, okay? I do want to focus on the idea of treatment, however. You know, we've got all these people who've gotten COVID. We've got people in hospitals. Why is it that these folks are not getting the same treatment that our very, very prestigious individuals at a governmental level were getting? Why are not those medications being made available to the average person? Okay. Why is it these people can get COVID, walk out of the hospital in 3 or 4 days and be fine? Okay. Those are the medications that need to be given to everybody who's got COVID. And we know what they are. All right. That's what we need to be focused on. Now, of course, nutrient therapy really should be in play. But the vast majority of people don't want to hear about that. Okay. They want to hear about IVs of vitamin C. They don't want to hear about IVs involving zinc and B6 and so forth, vitamin D and melatonin. I've talked about those things before. But there are pharmaceutical agents that are also available that can help. And everything from those monoclonal antibodies to those steroid treatments, all these things come into play. But hydroxychloroquine, I don't think so. Okay, that can be more dangerous. And I'm going to disagree with my colleague. He knows who he is out there. Brilliant man, but we disagree. I don't think it's worth the risk. It doesn't really deal with the mechanism of the COVID expression the way we should. A few of these other pharmaceutical agents that, Mr. Wells, you referenced, what was the one besides?
Plasma therapy and ivermectin.
Okay. Plasma therapy may be a help. It's not a cure. It's not a treatment that way. Okay. Ivermectin, the word is still out quite reasonably. Maybe some benefit, but am I going to put my family member on it? No. And I'll put it to you this way. Out of everything we've talked about, I don't think I'd be putting any of my family members on any of those things. Maybe plasma therapy, maybe. But that's because we know there are other treatments that actually do treat the actual condition and people do well with it. Okay. But we don't want to produce false hope for stuff that doesn't really provide the kind of real returns that we're looking for here. Okay. And we don't want to have any potential toxic effects. Hydroxychloroquine, been in the news quite a bit. It can cause cardiac issues. But there are many doctors who've said, I've used it tremendously and many numbers of times and never had any problems with anyone. That's fine. I'm just not in that camp. Okay. I give kudos to the fact that they are, but I'm not there.
As you mentioned early on in this program, several of the folks that are watching, several of the folks that will come back and watch this video later are Mensah medical patients. They have an understanding of biochemistry and so on and so forth. And so we can talk to them on that level. And so one of our patients has written in and asked, we've been, someone in our family has been diagnosed with pyrrole disorder and high levels of copper. Is this someone that should be concerned about taking the vaccine? And while we're at it, are there any other conditions that we typically see as far as histamine level, as far as methylation? Are there folks that have these various disorders that we typically see in our patient population that should have concerns about either the vaccine or which vaccine they're taking?
Yes.
Thank you for that one word.
It's all the above, unfortunately. I mean, look, our patient population is wonderful. We love our patients, we love our people. But let's understand something. These are the people who are identified. They're not the only ones. The vast majority of people out there have got some of these issues. So let's take sort of a blank slate and look at the fact that we could take our patient population and what they are as a window of the greater macrocosm of people who are out there exposed to COVID, okay? And when we do that, yes, there are undermethylators out there. Yes, there are overmethylators out there. Yes, there are copper toxic people out there. They just don't know it. So how are these folks in general responding to the whole vaccine process? And for the most part, they respond okay. Yes, there are going to be some side effects for many people, but overall, the gains are better than the challenges. I know this sounds weird, and I even feel almost weird saying these types of things in favor of vaccines, but this is a life or death situation as far as I'm concerned. I'm tired of seeing body bags. I'm tired about hearing of people who aren't doing well. So we got to address it. Now, let's bring some clarity to those of us who have been identified. Okay, the people I'm always concerned about are high copper people and people who are pyroluric, because copper is an inflammatory agent. It causes oxidative stress. It causes free radical damage. Folks, free radical damage is what causes cellular destruction and cellular disruption. You disrupt enough cells, you disrupt tissues. You disrupt tissues, you disrupt organs. You disrupt organs, you don't get proper functioning. Everything from immunity to anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, to your general physiologic health, cardiac conditions, bowel disorders, the whole gamut. Okay? So while we haven't talked about it much, if you're a high copper person, I'd be very concerned. I would look a little bit more carefully at the idea. If you're vacillating on getting a vaccine, the next question becomes, is your copper still high? Then I have to ask, have you been taking your supplement program, and why have you called us to get this straight? Okay. But if your copper is still out there and kind of crazy and uncontrolled, you need another temporizing measure. And I think that for your own safety, you have to look at your vulnerability and look more likely at getting a vaccine than not. Okay. So I want to superimpose that conversation upon the general conversation that we've had already. Okay. Pyro disorder. You know that's a disorder of stress intolerance at this point. You've heard me say it a million times. Well, COVID is one heck of a big stressor. So if you're already stress intolerant, then for you to sit down and you've got pyros of 130 when the scale ends at 50, okay, anything above really a 15 to 20 means you've got to take these things into consideration and be serious about it. You are very susceptible. So it's not a one-size-fits-all picture. And again, call me. We can talk about your particular case. But I think that if you do have a methylation disorder, that's a big challenge, because methylation controls ridiculous number of systems in your body, not just brain chemistry. Methylation goes down to all the way of your tissues literally being sewn together properly so that you have working muscle, working organs, and working systems in general. Okay, methylation is a huge, huge issue that most people have no idea the depth to which this goes. So if there's a methylation issue, don't even question it. Go get protected. Give us a call. We can discuss more. Okay. So those are the big ones: the copper, the pyrols, methylation.
We're getting towards the end of our time. We're going to be wrapping up by no later than 1 o'clock. And so if you have any other specific questions, now's the time to ask. One question that just came in, Dr. Mensah, can you address the delayed side effects from vaccines, such as disease enhancement, which has occurred in the context of failure of previous SARS and MERS vaccines in animal trials?
An undermethylator wrote that. I could probably identify a few hundred that frequently contact us with these wonderful questions. The whole idea of the side effect profile and previous failed attempts here, there are going to be side effects. There's no question about that. Okay, but I think what's really more important is the greater picture of the benefits that are involved here. Okay, folks, people are dying, and if you've got a sore arm for 24 hours, okay. If you feel like you've got flu-like symptoms for 24 hours, okay. What is more concerning to me is if for the next 8 months or 9 months you may survive. However, you've got neuropathies, you've got bleeding disorders, you've got cognitive issues because you're a sequela of COVID. So we don't talk too much about what some of the sequela of COVID happen to be. You had it, you survived, you're out of the hospital, but you can't go back to work. Okay, you can't function on. Some people can't walk. When you look at these things, as far as I'm concerned, there's no question about risk versus benefit here, statistically. Okay, so yes, there are challenging side effects. There are failed COVID attempts, but let's segue for a moment into nutrient therapy. How did we actually arrive at our nutrient protocol? I don't know if I've told you that. Well, you know, therapies that worked extremely well for the first coronavirus, okay, COVID SARS-1, those same therapies worked extremely well for this coronavirus. And those therapies were begun in China. They migrated over to Europe and to Australia. And these were the biochemical treatments that let so many people survive. And I'm going to be very frank with you. Go back to what it is that saved our president when he got COVID. They talked about things like, they talked about the medications, but they also said some very important things, 3 in particular that you've heard us say before. Vitamin C, zinc, and melatonin were known as being part of the regimen. A lot of our people out there, our doctor colleagues, they're using them, but they're using them in the wrong dosages. Everything is dose dependent. You can take an aspirin for a migraine headache, you got the right stuff, but not enough, as we say in medicine. That's particularly key, okay? So yeah, there's side effects. You know, there's side effects to nutrient therapy too, as far as vitamin C is concerned. You can get diarrhea. Diarrhea versus death, okay? Let's keep our eye really on the prize here and make sure we keep our folks alive.
We've got a question that just came in regarding the World Health Organization changing the standards for herd immunity. You know, that's certainly something that we've been talking about quite a bit lately as we talk about the vaccines becoming more and more available. You know, when do we reach that state of herd immunity? And the World Health Organization has even said that maybe we should exclude naturally acquired immunity, those people who get the the whole chicken pox phenomenon, where if you've had the chicken pox, then we consider you immune.
Listen, I'm not going to comment on what or who says what.
Right.
Okay. Here's what I'm going to share with you. We don't sit back and wait for herd immunity, whether you believe in it or not. What we simply look at is this: let's get our people taken care of. Let's get as many people protected as possible. Let's build up our own natural immunities. See, we're focusing on COVID, and this is why I don't want to get into what who says about this and what these agencies say right now. In another year, we could have another virus that comes up, another disease, another pandemic, another whatever. We don't know what could happen. The strongest thing we can all do is to build up our own personal immunity. Okay? Build ourselves up so that we have the capacity to fight whatever comes along. Now, let's think about it. If enough of us do this, now we're really doing something for the greater good and the greater population. It's when so many of us are susceptible that we now spread this capacity for really devitalizing our lives, our friends, our relatives, our cities, our towns, our economies. Okay. Sick people come to us at a cost. So let's gird ourselves up. Let's bring up the concept of, such as say, herd strength as opposed to herd immunity. And then let's see what happens at that point in time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's an important concept, that when we say we're trying to build up herd strength rather than herd immunity, it's not about let's all go out and catch the coronavirus so that we build up the antibodies, but rather let's fortify our immune systems so that we have a better chance of fighting off anything that might come at us, COVID or otherwise.
You know, there's an adage that we talk about in medicine, and it frustrates a great number of doctors. Most of what we spend billions of dollars for in the healthcare system, we do to ourselves. This is not us battling nature. We do this to ourselves, everything from our diet to our destructive activities, to a variety of things that we really should not be doing. We do it to ourselves, most of it. So let's flip the script, as they say, on this. Why don't we do the right things for ourselves? so that we can kind of minimize those destructive tendencies that will show up, that cost us money, time, our livelihoods, and the economy. Just a thought.
Well, Dr. Mensah, we're coming to the end of our scheduled time here. I want to remind folks that if Dr. Mensah shared something that you want to make sure you can go back and revisit, we're going to post a recording of this session to the Mensah Medical YouTube channel, so you can find it there to visit this information. I'm sorry. Go
I
ahead.
am going to say something I forgot to mention earlier. I want to talk a bit about why I don't like mRNA vaccines.
Please.
For the most part, what you're going to hear is that mRNA vaccines don't pose a real threat to long-term genetic capacity, okay? Because the question comes up, well, can this now become part of me, and is that going to be a real issue? There are enzymes that come from multiple sources, including viruses. Remember what I said to you about how the king, the DNA, tells the messenger what to do. The messenger delivers a message out to the, let's just say, the factory to make a protein or whatever have you, okay? Each one of those steps is governed by several different enzymes, and it should be in one direction. However, there are viruses out there, and there are other parts of your system that have reverse enzymes, okay? So the king gives an order to the messenger, but then there are enzymes that can say, hey, messenger, I want you to take this back to the king. It's like a Trojan horse, okay? So now there are enzymes called reverse transcriptases. Trans across right, scriptase right. In other words, you basically go back and rewrite your own DNA to incorporate that message. So it is actually in theory possible that the mRNA that is being coded for genetically could be reincorporated into DNA in parts of the system. Well, here's the problem. If it gets incorporated into DNA, that DNA is what's going to be passed on to children, future children that aren't born yet, if that DNA happens to be in the sperm or ova. If it's in regular cells, then the question about autoimmunity comes up. And then the third really crazy thing is, if it does get incorporated into your DNA and you produce it all the time, then guess what? The next time you actually come into contact with COVID or something like that, your body may not react to it because it's going to see the COVID as something it already knows in its own DNA, which is self, as opposed to non-self. In other words, your body won't respond to it. That is not a likely mechanism. But listen, folks, I'm a sci-fi fan. We see it all the time. It's possible to happen. So we've got to be careful about anything that affects the mRNA DNA sequence. Anything is possible. Not likely, but possible. All right.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Mensah. I want to remind everyone that Dr. Mensah earlier in this program made an offer that, in recognition of the impact that COVID is having on all of us, to make sure that those that need help have that help available, that Mensah Medical will see patients free of charge as long as you call within the next 24 to 30 or so hours before midnight Central Time tomorrow. You can contact Mensah Medical, and your doctor fees will be waived. Of course, there are still testing fees that have to be covered, and we can't provide you with free supplements, but this is an opportunity for folks to get the help that they need. Dr. Mensah, any closing thoughts as we end this?
Yeah, even when you get the vaccine, by the way, remember, it protects you. It doesn't mean that you can't carry something and give it to someone else. So we still are going to have to wear masks. We're still going to have to wash our hands. We're still going to have all those kinds of truly protective measures. And folks, listen, feel free to give us a call. All right, if you've got a question, something bothers you, whether you're a patient or not, we're here to try to help you. Okay, but I want to thank you for listening to all my hyperverbosity and blithering, right, Mr. Wells?
We're just long-winded because we like to share information that we know is going to help folks.
And because we love our brothers and sisters in the world. What it boils down to.
Absolutely.
Okay. So be safe, folks. Be safe. Take care. Thank you, Mr. Wells.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Once again, we will have a recording of this available on the Mensah Medical YouTube channel. So encourage folks to come back and take a look at it there. And we'll post links to it on the Mensah Medical Facebook page and our Instagram feed as well. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Mensah. Everyone stay safe.